Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series in defense of skepticism, how to believe nothing, doubt certain knowledge, dismantle dogmatists, avoid contradictions, eschew error, and never fall on the wrong side of the burden of proof. Again, in this video we are going to do the much anticipated, my personal take on skepticism, which is going to be known as indirect skepticism. I will offer some basic arguments for it, and some basic arguing styles of it here, and some basic explanations of how one can live as an indirect skeptic, and then in the following videos I will go into these claims more in depth and look at some objections to them. So, first off, we had this lovely kind of chart of where different skeptics lie. The indirect skeptics are going to lie in line with the Pyrrhonian skeptics on the claim that it's unknown whether knowledge is possible or not. It's in fact unknown as to whether it's unknown that knowledge is possible or not, and so on and so forth. The indirect skeptics lack any beliefs. They use but don't rely on academic and Pyrrhonian arguments. They have their own set of arguments they're going to put forward. They hold different attitudes towards propositions. Instead of beliefs, they can hold many other attitudes, and that's one of the ways that they can get through life. And they're going to argue, instead of just using kind of the Pyrrhonian or academic arguments, they're going to use long indirect proofs that are going to incorporate these arguments into them. So, speaking of arguing, let's take a look. Basically, here's how to argue as an indirect skeptic. You assume another's position in the first line of a proof. You take all of the propositions that they hold to be true, and you stick them in that first line of the proof as a long conjunction. That's generally going to include, for most people, the laws of logic, which are going to tell you you're allowed to use an indirect proof. So it's okay. Next up, you're going to demonstrate that that proposition or that series of propositions leads to a contradiction, as inevitably most of them will. And then negate the original assumptions. If you run into a position that does not lead to a contradiction or does not have a problem, you will investigate more and see if you can hash that out of someone's belief system. Because odds are it's going to be in there somewhere. Why? Because the laws of logic themselves lead to a contradiction. Let's take a look. So, let's, in our first line of our proof, assume that the laws of logic are true. That's all we're doing. We're looking at someone whose only worldview is laws of logic are true, completely a skeptic about everything else. Assumed indirect proof. Premise 2. All propositions are either true or false. It's the law of the excluded middle, comes directly from premise 1. The proposition, this proposition is false, is neither true nor false. That's just the liar's paradox. If you think you can argue for that proposition being either true or false, be my guest. But it seems pretty self-evident that that proposition is going to be neither true or false, as if it's false, it must be true, and if it's true, it must be false. Therefore, there exists some proposition that is neither true nor false. That's just premise 3 existential generalization right there. It's not the case that all propositions are either true or false. Premise 4, change of quantifier. It both is and is not the case that all propositions are either true or false. 2-5 conjunction, that's a contradiction inherent in the very laws of logic that we all rely on. That you rely on to do anything, including this proof. Well, does that mean we can't have done this proof? No, it simply means that we now, if we step out of the proof, all we can conclude is it's not the case of the laws of logic. Or maybe we're wrong about it not being the case of the laws of logic. Maybe my cognitive faculties have done this proof wrong. But it surely doesn't seem that I can know that the laws of logic are the case, because they seem right now to lead to a contradiction. From 1 through 6 indirect proof. I'm going to explain this more in detail in the next video where I talk about arguing as an indirect skeptic, but this is the basic formulation, and this is a very powerful argument for the indirect skeptic. Now we're going to talk about action and kind of a theory of action for the indirect skeptic. It's a big problem for skeptics in general because people will say, well, if you don't believe anything, you can't act, you can't do anything, you're going to starve, you're going to sit in a room, you're not going to act in any way. However, this seems to just be blatantly false. We may suspend judgment on the truth of beliefs without hindering our life. However, suspending action is an action in itself. and therefore impossible. I can choose to suspend judgment or not take a position on two beliefs. However, if I suddenly wake up in a room and there's a button in front of me and there's a sign that says, if you press this button, you will get $50. If you don't press this button, you will get $20. Whatever I do, I've made a choice. I can't suspend action because not acting is actually taking an action. It's different from belief in this important way. Therefore, the indirect skeptic needs some way to act, because they can't suspend action even though they can suspend belief. That is not based on beliefs, because they don't have beliefs. Let's see what we can do. Well, belief is something like a propositional attitude. It's called a propositional attitude. That is to say that we feel a certain way towards a particular proposition. In the case of belief, we accept a particular proposition as true. However, belief is not the only propositional attitude that is open to us. We can desire that a proposition is true, or hope that a proposition is true. We can wonder if a proposition is true, or consider that a proposition is true. We can suspect that a proposition is true, or we can doubt that it is. A skeptic can hold any of these other propositional attitudes. Philosophy doesn't like to talk about them, and philosophy definitely biases belief over any other propositional attitude. But there's a lot more out there. And you can get by in life with desire, wonder, and doubt alone. But if you want something more specific, let's take a look. You could have a proclivity. Well, a skeptic does not have beliefs. They may or may not have proclivities. In this, I'm going to define subject S has a proclivity to act in accordance with P if and only if S generally acts as if P were the case. They don't believe it, but they act as if P were the case. S has a proclivity to act in accordance with P will be represented as PCSP. Let's take a look. So, for example, if a car is approaching a skeptic, they may lack the belief that either they or the car exists, but they have a proclivity to act as if they do. They may have a proclivity to act as if cars exist, and they exist, and they don't want to get hit by a car, and they don't want to die. They have a proclivity to act as if these beliefs were true. However, they don't accept them as true, and they don't believe them. If the skeptic jumps out of the way, it's not because of a specific thought process of, wow, I believe that a car is moving towards me. I believe that a car was going to hit me if I don't move. I believe that I exist, and the car exists, and the car is made of physical objects. I believe that I don't want to get hit by a car. I believe that if I don't want to get hit by a car, I should jump out of the way. Wow, I should jump out of the way. They don't have that very logical line of thought process. It's just a proclivity that they have to act in a certain way. In the same way that, honestly, most people, if they suddenly turned around and saw a car rushing at them, would not go through that long thought process. They would not think in such propositional terms. They would not believe things at all. They would just jump out of the way. It's the same way that if someone were to put a bowl of delicious food in front of me while I was intensely involved in watching a video or talking to someone, I would not form the belief, I am hungry, I should eat, I am going to reach my hand down into this bowl of food and start eating it. I would just act that way. You can act without beliefs. Animals that are unable to form propositional attitudes, because they don't speak languages and you need a language to have a proposition, act and take actions. We can act without belief. Proclivity is just one way of codifying that. There's many other explanations for it. Basically, the skeptic merely has a proclivity to act in accordance with the claim, I should avoid fast-moving objects. Next up, we're going to take a look more in depth at the arguments of the indirect skeptic, how one can argue without beliefs, and I'm going to deal with a bunch of objections to kind of that form of argument. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody. Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Kuhn. If you enjoyed that last video, you should check out these other videos by Carneades.org, or just subscribe to Carneades.org on YouTube for the latest updates. Keep shifting that paradigm, everybody.